In this video, I'll be going through my process of modeling a simple wooden crate to be used to showcase the texturing process from start to finish. Though this model will be relatively simple, the process can be applied to any complexity of objects. Because I'm an artist and not an engineer, whether I'm making a box or designing a new kind of vehicle, my goal is to go into my work with a better understanding of how what I'm making works so that I can obtain a result that looks as good as possible and will allow for the least amount of stumbling along the way. Just like painters have done for centuries, conducting a short study of your subject can lend invaluable insight into the process. With the goal of creating a final low-poly model of a wooden shipping crate, I'm first going to set up what the crate would look like board by board so that I can understand the construction well enough to simplify it onto the surface of a less complex model. To do this, I first want to create my board. Knowing that it's a 2x4, I will put in some values to make it that proportion. Though your grid may be sized differently, the proportions still work, and in my case, with my grid being in multiples of 10, these values should help keep things easy and let me snap things to the grid. To start things off, I'm going to be building the base, or the bottom of the crate. Which should be set up in a square. For now, the fact that things overlap is okay. I'm going to resize these two boards as though they'd been cut, but to start things off, I want to make sure that everything is aligned nicely with my center. And that works for me. So now I can take these two objects and size them down accordingly. Now, to show what I'm doing a little bit easier, I'm going to turn on wireframe. And this is my starting point. Now, as well, from here, I need to be able to add a wall of boards to go along with the frame that I've created. So I'm going to start laying these out. And I'm going to offset them a little bit from where the edges are, because if I'm going to have multiple of these pieces, these sides, connecting into one another, there needs to be enough room for the boards to exist. So what I'm going to do is scoot this over and shorten up my board to be about one grid space apart, or in this case, the width of my board, so that when I place multiple of these, they will fit snugly with one another. And doing something like this when you get to the texturing portion is a really easy way for you to figure out exactly how many units across a shape like this would end up being without having to guess. So I can look at this very easily and tell there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 boards. And given my style choices, I could choose to shift these over, have it be 8, and have them evenly lined up with the edges here, but you can do whatever works best for you. Now, to make things a little bit easier to see without the wireframe turned on, I'm going to quickly go through and bevel each of these boards so that they have a little bit of a more rounded edge so you can see them distinct from one another. Now, with each of these pieces, to the point that I like them, I'm now going to combine them together so that I have a consistent piece to work with. Because I'm working on the grid, I won't need to reposition my center point as it is aligned with the grid. From here, I can start duplicating my objects and repositioning them to be the various sides of my crate. And as you can see, because of my choice of spacing, these fit very snugly from one corner to another. You can see that they will also align very snugly along the sides, but there will be some spacing on the bottom. When doing my final textures, this is something that can be sort of tweaked and made to look appropriate for the shape that I'm going with. And finally, duplicating the bottom. And I now have a lid. And there you have a finished high poly crate study that I can now use to better understand what the proportions are going to be for my very simplified box. Now, because I've built this high poly version, what I can go ahead and do is have my box sort of trace this shape. Now, as I have this here, I can select my faces, extrude this. I want to make sure that I'm keeping faces together, turned off, so that each of these faces can be extruded as their own separate operation. And with a rough idea of where the edges are going to be on my object, I can line things up and make myself a simplified version of this object. So with this in mind, I can take a simple shape like this, use what I've learned from creating this, and texture a similar pattern of boards onto this object. The final step to my study is going to be to incorporate cross support beams across each of the faces. This is something that can be done at the initial state of creating the sides themselves and duplicating it, or they can be added in afterwards. So a couple different ways that support beams tend to be done in a crate like this. Having something that is down the center will get you support this way. An alternative is to have a board that goes diagonally across. Now, in the case of something like this, I'm going to take the end here, and in component mode, in this case I'm going to turn off my grid snapping and slide this down. Now what this will allow me to do is emulate a board being cut at an angle to allow it to rest easily on either end, rather than having it being cut twice on either end and being lined up with either side. Now, because this process has made some of my boards a little bit thinner, what I'm going to do is take either of these points and scale them up so that I can make them approximately the same width as they started out. This same process can be applied to my low poly version by making myself a cube, getting it again to be about the same size, and positioning it similarly. Just as before, I can take the components as necessary and widen my board. Now, to keep my finished low poly model as simplified as possible, I'm going to remove some of the faces from this object. Because when it's being looked at, the only three faces that I'll need to be able to see are the three facing outward. And this piece now can be duplicated, rearranged, and applied to each of the other sections of my crate. In the next video, I will be taking a look at laying out UVs. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.